Hey guys, and welcome to Smite Tactics Closed Beta Patch 4. And what a patch it has been. A lot of things have been shaken up in terms of God's abilities and how that whole thing works. And I feel like Hi-Rez have done a really good job, and then they identified a problem I didn't even realize that the game had until this patch. So we're going to mostly focus on the God changes in this video and discussing those and kind of what I think about them. So effectively what they've done is, previously what would happen is when you played a God, you would then have an option on the next turn to use their ability or attack. You could never do both. And what this meant that 9 times out of 10, attacking was usually more useful than the ability, except for on a certain few key gods who had really strong abilities. So god abilities didn't really get used that much. And it was kind of a clunky mechanic where players were like, they weren't sure whether they should use their ability or whether they should just attack. So basically what Hi-Rez have done is they've made all of the abilities, except for those of leaders, passive now. So they all kind of just trigger in certain instances, whether that be when you play the card, when the card dies, when you attack with the card. Like, there's lots of different kind of changes, which we're going to go through. I'm going to discuss how I feel about them. Now, bear in mind, with a patch like this, there's going to be some balance changes. As a balance issues. And the reason for that is, you know, when you do a big change like this, you're not going to be able to immediately identify all of the places where things might be overpowered or underpowered. So, you know, expect certain things to be OP for at least CB4. Now, leaders, we have a new leader, so we'll start there. And leaders' abilities have been changed in that you can now attack and use an ability with a leader. And China now has a second leader, and that is Guan Yu. Spend 2 mana and put Crescent Blade into your hand. Crescent Blade being the 0 mana cost, deal 1 damage card. It has lots of nice synergies with, you know, stuff like the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Archer, where things happen when you play an item, because Crescent Blade is an item. So that's really cool, and he can do that on his turn and attack. Similarly, Nuwa, she can spawn her Stealth Clouds and attack. And to make up for these kind of changes, you'll notice that some of the leaders have been adjusted a little bit in terms of their mana costs, which I think is perfectly reasonable. So now Isis, you spend 1 mana. She's completely changed. Instead of silencing, you spend 1 mana to give protect 1 until the start of your next turn. And you can actually do that to yourself, so you can protect yourself and then use the auto attack. So this is a nice little ability. And I think, like, 1 mana seems to be an okay cost. Like, 2 mana would be kind of too expensive, especially, you know, when you look at other protect cards in the game. Similarly, Ra, he hasn't changed. Spend 2 mana, restore 1 health to friendlies in the target area. That's basically the same. It's a 2x2 square. But he can now attack on the same turn. Then we have Poseidon, 2 mana, deal 1 damage in target area. On next turn, deal 1 additional damage. This has been made smaller. It's just a 1 tile area now. So you just deal 1 damage in an area. But then you can also attack. So, you know, I feel like overall he's in a nice position. Zeus now costs 3 mana to draw a card, but he can draw a card and attack. So that makes sense. Like, 2 mana for a card and attacking seemed quite strong. So this, you know, keeps him in line with the other leaders. Then we have Norse, 3 mana to banish a non-leader enemy, which is nice because, you know, when Freya gets into like a banish loop, it can be quite frustrating. And then Odin, spend 2 mana to give a friendly +1/+1 until your next turn, plus an attack. And this is something that people feel is a little bit not balanced or unbalanced because of, you know, maybe how slightly overtuned the Norse gods are, but we will get to that in a second. So effectively, they kind of identified that, you know, it's a bit awkward to use your gods. Some things like Taunt were super frustrating to play against. So this will hopefully help players to make, you know, smart choices. The mechanics will feel better automated, and, you know, you'll maybe feel a bit more comfortable when you build your decks, because I feel like they kind of simplified things a little bit and made things a little bit clearer. So we'll start with Chinese, why not? Though Hu Yi is not currently here, we can go through his changes as well. Okay, so Chinese Chang'e now she's just ranged, and at the end of your turn, heals all adjacent friendlies for 1. So instead of, you know, having that whole Hu Yi synergy and, you know, you choosing to heal rather than attack, although she, you know, doesn't really have attack, she's basically an AoE heal bot, and she still has that nice synergy with transfusion, where, you know, you can put her damage up to 5 and do the AoE heal. So I think this is fine in terms of how they've changed her abilities. She seems pretty good. Then Hu Yi is not here, but I can find his changes for you. Hu Yi, now his auto attacks, I believe they like bounce, so they also hit an adjacent unit. So Hu Yi, he's epic, costs 4 mana, 3/3. But yeah, his ranged attacks also hit a random energy adjacent to the target. So, you know, previously you'd have to use your ability and then you get the bounce. Now his auto attacks just have the bounce. They just have that adjacent attack. And again, this just seems like, you know, simplified. It seems more straightforward to players. And the other interesting thing is now, because the abilities are on basic attacks, you then also have retaliation against abilities, which is a nice change, I think. Because sometimes it was very frustrating when people could just get free damage from abilities without any sort of, repercussions. Ao Kuang's a bit different. Afterlife, leave behind a 0/5 illusion. If the illusion is not killed by the end of turn, it deals 2 adjacent damage to all adjacent enemies. So, Afterlife triggers when the unit dies. So you can summon up Ao Kuang, and then when he dies, he leaves behind this illusion. And if they don't deal with it, that deals 2 damage to all adjacent enemies. So if you can kind of keep them next to the illusion, that's quite nice. So he has this kind of passive effect now, whereas previously you had to teleport him and leave behind like a passive. And again, it's much more simple. Then with Sun Wukong, Warcry, discover an animal form. So Warcry happens when he's played, and discover, basically what it does, I'll have some images here, is it presents you with the 3 animal forms, and you pick one of them. You don't actually put it in your hand like this says. What happens is it just plays it on Sun Wukong. So whether it's Ox, he gets Ox form, Tiger, it's Tiger form, and Bird, it's Bird form. And that's the Chinese pantheon, more or less, summed up. Okay, Egyptian changes. Let's have a look what we've got. So Sobek, we'll start with. His auto attacks just throw enemies. So instead of, having to work out on what turn will my auto attack, will I have my ability up to target an enemy, they just throw enemies now. Every auto attack. On the flip side, this now only does the 1 damage because it does his 1 base attack damage, whereas previously it did 2 damage, and he does take retaliation damage from this. But, with Ra's healing being available every turn, I like this. I think Sobek is quite a useful card because I think repositioning cards can be super useful. And overall, I think he'll still see play. Bastet, I feel like this is a nerf because now this effect only happens when she's killed. So instead of spawning her and trying to spawn like 8 billion cats, you now only get 3 when she dies. But saying that, you have the question of, do I kill Bastet? Because if I kill Bastet, they get 3 cats, or do I kind of wait? Because then I have to deal with the cats. So I think she's definitely still strong, but you maybe don't have that potential to spawn her in a bush and then just keep summoning cats for an entire game. So that, I actually think she's probably in a good place balance-wise. Serket is much better. Serket previously, you had the ability to poison an adjacent unit, and then that would die at the end of the next turn. And it's like, what would be the point of doing that? You could attack for 3, or you could poison them and they'd get an entire turn. And if I wanted to poison enemies, I could just play Last Breath, which poisons up to 2 enemies for 4 mana cost. So she wasn't really in a good place. Now, when she dies, she poisons a random adjacent non-leader enemy, and then they die at the end of the turn. So if you kill Serket, one of your units is getting poisoned. Which I think is very interesting, especially against melee units, because obviously it's an adjacent non-leader enemy. But the thing is, I think what you can do here is then use Scarab's Blessing on Serket, attack something which kills her, get the 3 damage out, trigger the afterlife, trigger the poison effect, and then have her come back to life. I believe that synergy should work. Someone, if it's not the case, let me know in the comments below. So these afterlife abilities are actually getting quite interesting in terms of synergy with Scarab's Blessing in Egyptian. And you'll notice that afterlife is quite common in the Egyptian pantheon. Anher, now all of his attacks knock back units by 2 tiles, and if they hit something, they get stunned. So instead of using this as ability, it's now on his auto attack. He takes retaliation damage, but he can knock back everyone. And in some ways this is kind of interesting because it makes you much more tactical with Anhar, because sometimes you don't want to knock back a unit, sometimes you want to keep them in range of yourself. So knocking back could be a hindrance, and I think players will have to be a lot more tactical in how they position Anhar and how they use his auto attacks. Next we have Geb. Geb I think is now, but it's nerfed basically. But I think it's the right decision. So previously every 2 turns Geb could basically give another unit 2 health. So every 2 turns he'd give a unit 2 health. Now he gives the friendly 3 health and removes CC when he's spawned. That's what a Warcry is. So then you get your +3 health when you play him, so it's up 1 health because of that. But then once he's on the board, you're now using him as a unit to attack things. You're not just trying to keep him safe and just healing everyone, because that's a bit silly. But I still think Geb is a useful card because that heal is quite nice. But this seems like, it seems like you're kind of putting him in the right position, because it then encourages you to also use your gods offensively and not just, use them as a heal bot. Then we have Khepri. Attacks deal damage in a line and give +1/+0 to all friendlies they pass through until the end of turn. This is interesting. Like, Khepri wasn't really seeing play. He had these, like, buffing and debuffing kind of abilities. But now he kind of seems to be able to buff everyone. But they have to be in a line. So this is kind of interesting because, that's good for range units, but maybe not so good for melee units. And it kind of remains to be seen what will happen with Khepri. You might find him placed in some kind of interesting decks that people have come up with, but I still don't expect him to see much play. Neith, now all of her attacks root enemies, so she every attack route. And note these kind of things don't happen on retaliation. So like Anher knockback and Neath root and stuff, they only happen when this unit attacks, not when this unit, you know, hits back if you attack it. But now all of the attacks route, which can be quite frustrating because it's a 4 damage route, which is kind of a buff. But then on the flip side, you know, she takes retaliation damage from that, especially against ranger units. Whereas previously you would often use the route to deal 2 damage without taking damage back. And you'll notice that she's now gone up in mana cost. She now costs 5 instead of 4 because this is a very strong ability. Anubis now feels a lot more legendary because his ability triggers when you summon him. So you summon him and then you play that 3 damage line of you know, damage area of effect. And then enemies in the target at the end of their next turn take 3 damage. So then you can play this and then you can always stun them in it, for example, to get 6 damage out of him in one turn. With something like Fist of the Gods only costs 1, for example. And yeah, no, he definitely feels legendary now. It's definitely frustrating because it's you know, a 3 damage on the turn that he summoned, so it's kind of like a god with a Magma Slam, for example. The Magma Slam just deals 3 damage to a unit. But yeah, I think it's fine. I don't feel like he's, you know, completely broken or overpowered. You know, you have to wait till the 6th turn to get him, and he can be dealt with, but it definitely makes sense for a legendary card to have that sort of strength, is what I would say. And Osiris is our last Egyptian god. Warcry, tether all adjacent enemies until your next turn. If a tethered enemy moves out of melee range, they are stunned. I think he was previously a 4/7. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. So he has been buffed in terms of his strength. But this tether effect, no one was ever using it because why would you tether someone when you could just hit them for 4 damage, right? But now the tether happens when you spawn him. So then you're much more likely to spawn him because then you can use it to kind of try and control the position of your opponents, right? And they're tethered until your next turn, and then if they're tethered, they move, they're stunned. So there's kind of interesting kind of synergies here with Osiris. And as a 5/7, the fact that you can have 2 of him in your deck, he's pretty strong anyway. Plus this passive that now always happens. Like I definitely think you can see Osiris coming into play in some of your Egyptian decks for, you know, late game win conditions. Okay, Greek. Greek is where we're going to see a lot of guard, which I'll discover, which is the new replacement for Taunt. And I think it's a good decision because Taunt was inherently not fun to play against, and I think you have a problem in your game if you have mechanics that aren't fun. I think it's also important to have fun mechanics. But we'll point out this card here, Judgment. Judgment is a new card. Deal 2 damage to a non-leader. If you control 2 or more gods, deal 4 damage instead. So Judgment is basically like a Sunder, but if you have 2 or more gods, it then does 4 damage. So it's like a double Sunder. And it costs 2. And this is interesting. I think if you feel like you can get board control with your gods, then this is quite useful. It's kind of like a late game Sunder, because once you get some gods on the board, then Judgment, you can play it and get that 4 damage, which is nice. I think I also missed there's a new card in the Chinese Pantheon. Discord. This is just a bit of fun. Move all enemies to a random adjacent tile. So he's just moving things around. It's not something I would personally play. I feel like RNG and randomness is inherently risky. And I think like justifying running this in a 20 card deck when there's better items to trigger trigger effects of like Imperial Archer and stuff. Maybe not the smartest plan. Anyway, back to Greek. So, Greek gods. Aphrodite. Basically, you know, she had that initiative where you would kiss someone. That is now a war cry, so you can't re-target it. So you can't, like, you know, later on decide to target someone else with it. But she's more or less the same, right? War cry, target a friendly and give them protect 1 and heal them for 1 at the start of your turn. So you kiss them at the start of your turn when you summon her. You get the protections. And this is good because people often forgot to kiss people. They forget that she has initiative, especially new players. Initiative wasn't always obvious for them that you could do something on the turn that you summon them. So the fact that this has Warcry now, I feel like it makes it a bit clearer. You play her down and then you immediately target who you want to link to. Right? Makes sense. This does mean you have to be a little bit careful in ordering. Like if you want to link to something that you want to summon on the same turn, summon the thing you want to link kiss before you summon Aphrodite. Scylla, I think this change is really good. So Scylla, previously her ability just dealt 4 damage at a range of 3, and then if it killed the unit, it immediately went off cooldown and you could just use it on the next turn. So you were constantly putting out 4 damage at a range of 3. And this is a card that everyone, you had to deal with, basically. If you didn't get rid of Scylla, this was a game winner. You know, the more turns that she had up, the more units she could clear, and you're going to have a very tough time. Now, she's ranged and she has charge. So when you play her, you can automatically attack. She's also a 1/3. I think previously she was a 1/4, so she's got a little bit less health, which should make her a little bit easier to deal with. But if Scylla kills an enemy, she gains +3/+0 until the end of your next turn. So effectively, now, in order to get her to the state where she's dealing 4 damage at a go, you have to first kill something that only has 1 health, right? So you have to then summon her, use her to kill something with 1 health, and at that point she becomes that 4/0. So there's a bit more, it's a bit more conditional. And overall, I think this is a fair change. I think, you know, between her and Medusa, like, they were kind of running rampant in Greek, in that it was very hard to control and hard to deal with once these cards were on the board if you didn't have the clear, and then once they got, like, you know, taunts out, you were basically scuppered. So I like this change. Okay, onwards. Through the gods. Thanatos, Warcry. Travel to any non-leader enemy with 2 or less health and kill them. So it does, it's like his Death Scythe, you know, it's the same as his ability. You summon him, he goes and kills something with 2 less health. It's just a Warcry now. So, yep, happy with this. This is fine. Arachne, at the end of your turn, spawn a 1/1 Spiderling. So previously, at the end of a turn, she would spawn a 0/1 Spiderling. That, on her next turn, if she could use an ability to give that Spiderling taunt. But taunt's been removed from the game, and honestly, it was a very confusing interaction. And often, you know, why would you want a 1 strength taunt when you could deal 4 damage? So now, you know, if you don't deal with her, she's going to start spawning Spiderlings. I think she's a good card. I think she'll see play, and I think this is much simpler and ultimately better. Then we have Enyo. Enyo's flag has now been changed. Instead of it being a 0/4 that slows the opponent, it's now a 0/3 that buffs adjacent units. So you're now playing the flag in the back line to basically make all of your units stronger, which is kind of interesting, and I kind of like this change. But because it's now buffing all your units, you know, it's also been a little bit nerfed. It now only has 3 health on the flag, and you can still deploy units from the flag. So if you want to, you know, you might want to place it tactically to block someone, but then you maybe don't get the benefits of the buff, the damage buff. And again, because it's a Warcry, people now don't forget to use it. Hades, Warcry, force adjacent enemies to move away and root them. So this is like an AoE now. It hits everyone. So when you play him, adjacent enemies will all move away, and then they run away and they get rooted. So like his Fear, which was an initiative, it's now an AoE, so it's multi-target. I think this makes Hades, you know, a little bit more useful than he was. He was still, you know, a useful card. He did see play. But this I like it. I think he's in a good place. Medusa, attacking a damaged non-leader enemy turns it into snow into stone. So this is exactly the same as her previous ability. She's still a pain in the ass. She's still something you want to deal with, but she's legendary and you only have 1 of her. Basically, if a unit is weakened, you attack them and they turn into a statue when they die. It's really frustrating. So yeah, she's still a pain in the ass. Athena, guard. Okay, so guard, it's not taunt actually. It is guard. Basically, if a unit has guard, then adjacent friendlies cannot be targeted by attacks. So you can still move around the taunted unit, you know, that's not a thing. Abilities, because they're now all passive, can still be, you know, used with attacks. But basically, if I slam Athena down next to my Zeus, you cannot target the Zeus until you have killed the Athena. Athena can also be placed anywhere on the map. So, you know, she's quite flexible in that. But guard is definitely, you know, it's worse than taunt was. It's definitely a step down. But I think ultimately, you know, you still have that ability to protect other units. So I still feel like it's going to be useful. It's just, you know, she's definitely not as strong. And I think part of this is because there was so much taunt in the Greek deck that, you know, all I was doing when I was playing Greek was you play taunt and then they clear it, and then you play more taunt and then they clear it, and then you play more taunt, and eventually they run out of clear and yet they're super taunted, and then you play Scylla and Medusa and everyone cries. So yeah, I don't know. I think this kind of remains to be seen. It might need a little bit of tweaking in terms of like the base stats of guard cards, now that they're not as strong in terms of their taunt. They may need, you know, better stats to justify their mana cost. We'll see. Ares, Warcry, pull an enemy to you and stun them. So on the turn that you spawn him, you get the pull and you get the stun, which is nice. You know, you can reposition units, but 7 cost, I still feel like he's too expensive. Even though he's the 3/8, I just feel like, you know, he's more expensive than Athena, and at least Athena protects things. We'll see. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, Norse. This is where things get fun, because definitely I feel like some of these cards are maybe a little bit overtuned, and it's worth kind of looking into them and having a wee think. So Odin, like I say, he can now buff a unit, you know, on that turn. +1/+1 until your next turn. And then that's kind of interesting because, you know, a lot of the Norse squads kind of, they have buffed attack anyway. So then being able to do that and attack is kind of quite a lot. Anyway, so Sol attacks deal damage to target and all enemies adjacent to the target. So she's now a 1/2 rather than a 2/2, and she has her stealth, but when she hits something, it then does an AoE burst. So you need to be careful when you're positioning your units against a Soul, because bear in mind that, you know, she's going to hit 1, she's going to basically do 1 damage to every unit in a what, 3x3 area, depending on how they're positioned. So that's something to be aware of. Skadi does the same. Warcry, add a coulter to your hand and reduces cost by 1, so you get the coulter. She no longer has her ability that she can spam off cooldown, you know, the 2 damage. Now she has to use her auto attacks to do the 2 damage. But I think this is fine because I think her ability was a little bit overkill. The fact that she could just deal 2 damage and reduce movement speed by 1 every single turn without taking any sort of retaliation damage. I think this is fine. Next, we have Fenrir. If Fenrir has not attacked when your turn ends, he gains +2/+2. This happens on the turn that you summon him. And bear in mind, on the turn that you summon him, you can't attack anyway unless you use charge. What this actually is a 4-cost 4/5, which I think is very strong, especially with the state of, you know, Norse Rush already. Giving them a 4/5 for 4 mana cost. 5 health is really hard to deal with for a lot of people. Like, I mean, Egyptian can execute it, but 5 health is a lot to take off, especially when, you know, that could potentially lead you taking 4 retaliation damage. You know, it's pretty stressful. And then with sprint, you know, you could play Fenrir. He's a 4/5. You give him sprint, he can attack again. You use, you know, maybe Odin's ability, so he's a +1/+1. So he's now a 5/6. He's a 5/6, which can attack twice with sprint. That's something that we kind of need to think about in terms of balance. Similarly, we have Loki. He is now a 6/3, and the first attack teleports him to the target and deals attack damage. So he teleports to them and deals 6 damage, basically. But with Odin, he actually deals 7 damage. You know, with sprint or frenzy. Frenzy, he can deal 9 damage. Sprint, he can deal 7 damage. And then attack again for 7 damage. That's 14 damage! That's so much damage. And, like, you know, with Web of Words, you discover a Norse god, so it gives you a choice of 3 Norse gods. Loki is a Norse god, so you have the option to get Loki from Web of Word. And this is kind of why I kind of feel that Norse is a little bit overtuned, because they have all of these, you know, attack buffs anyway. And we have Thor, the 4/4, gain +1/+0 for each adjacent enemy, so he's then getting buffed up in damage again. So then it's a lot of cards to deal with, you know? So, like, the mid-range kind of Norse is seeming quite strong to me. Then we have Ymir, all of his attacks stun. So then if these aren't enough, you can then start stunning people, and then your Fenrirs and your Thors aren't taking return damage. I think Ymir's overall, his balance is okay. I think it's like your Fenrir and Loki, for example. They need to be kind of sorted out in terms of their position with all these other cards. But this is a big change, and, you know, with big changes, there's always going to be slight balance issues, and I think it's something that Hi-Rez will address. In the long term, I think, you know, they're trying out this new feature where you don't have activated abilities, and all in all, I think this is the right decision. So yeah, that's basically it in terms of the god changes. On the grand scheme of things, I think all of the changes are fair, and they haven't, you know, they haven't ruined or massively changed the flavor of the game too much. They've just kind of made it, you know, more understandable, a little bit more tactical, and a little bit more kind of thought-based, whilst also removing the fact that, you know, a lot of cards maybe wouldn't see play because their abilities, you had to make a choice between ability or an attack. Now, you don't have to make that choice, so I think you can see some of these gods, you know, Fenrir, for example, actually seeing play when previously they weren't often played. The last thing I want to mention is there's a new neutral card, and that is the Blade Master. Warcry, restore 3 health to your leader. So he's a 7-cost 4/7 that also heals your leader for 3. Which I think is interesting. Like, a 4/7 is nice. This is maybe kind of a later game card. But my problem with strong minions will always be that Minion Recruiter exists on Egyptian. And this is the reason I never run Fire Giant, even though, you know, playing a 7-cost 7/7 is huge. That Minion Recruiter exists. A Minion Recruiter, where is it? Spawn a minion from your opponent's deck under your control. So as soon as, like, someone plays a 3-cost and gets, like, a 7-cost card, you know, that's a problem. And ultimately, if you had to choose between Blade Master, if you're going to run one, and you had to choose between Blade Master and Fire Giant, you'd run Fire Giant, because a 7/7 with all your friendlies getting +1 is better than a 4/7 and healing for 3, right? But ultimately, I guess this is a poor man's Fire Giant. And I think until, like, Minion Recruiter gets adjusted, or these minion tags get changed, I don't expect you to see these played that much at a very high competitive level. But yeah, that's my kind of 10 cents on the god changes. Let me know what you think about them in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button. You know, have been other changes in this patch. Some of the neutral cards maybe have balance changes. They've made some adjustments to the map. I'll have the patch notes in the links below. But today I just really wanted to talk about the gods and the god changes, as well as the new cards. And on the whole, I'm kind of excited for this. I like when Hi-Rez starts to do experimental new things during their closed betas to try and find out what works and what doesn't. And I think this is definitely a step in the right direction for Smite Tactics. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. And, you know, if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button. You can also catch me on twitch.tv/Jaggerus live streaming Smite Tactics, or on Twitter @Jaggerus. Thanks for watching. Have a fantastic day, guys. And I'll hopefully catch you guys in the next one.